So welcome to the investor panel. Halfway through day two, you should be picking up a few common themes on how to think about your business. But now it's time to hear from the people you're going to have to convince to give you some money. So I'd like to welcome our panel. I think first let's just kick off with some brief introductions from our panel, starting at the far end. Casey.
Hi, my name's Casey Denton. I work for TPG Biotech. I've been there about 6 years. I focus on therapeutics, services, and we're also doing a little bit of commercial stage medical devices.
I'm Elon Zipkin, Senior Investment Director with Takeda Ventures, which is the strategically aligned corporate venture group within Takeda Pharmaceuticals. Been there for almost 4 years. But have been doing biotech VC since 2000, previously in 2 institutional funds, MPM Capital and Prospect Venture Partners.
Hi, I'm Tracy Saxton. I'm with the Roche Venture Fund. Even though I work for a corporate pharmaceutical, we're a financial fund. We work based on financial returns, so we'll talk probably a little bit in the panel about the differences between some corporate venture funds. I've been doing venture investing for about 7 years now. Previously, I was with SV Life Science Advisors.
Hi, I'm Simeon George. I'm with SR1, the venture arm of GlaxoSmithKline. Been with the group for about 8 years, and I focus on therapeutics.
I'm Jenny Rook at 5 Prime Ventures, and I focus on everything but therapeutics, I guess. No, mostly tools and diagnostics, as well as synthetic biology and genetic engineering, and including applications of these life sciences technologies outside of healthcare.
Excellent. Thank you, panel. So as you heard, we've got quite a broad spectrum of investors, which is helpful because hopefully they'll have some complementary views and some conflicting views of the world. So kicking off, so investment criteria for an early stage startup. What is it you're looking at in terms of how far along they are, or what aspects of a business plan do you think these guys need to have before you'll take them to your investment committees? Let's start with Tracy.
Well, it's highly variable. So Roche Venture Fund has traditionally focused on early stage therapeutics. So we will look at early stage drug discovery. We'll even look at target identification plays, which is considered very early. That would be sort of 3 or 4 years before the clinic. But in that case, the idea has to be really big. There has to be something that's really clear that there's going to be value early on in the program. So every company is different and have different criteria. And sometimes we'll look at clinical stage assets. Sometimes we'll say it needs to be 12 to 18 months to the IND. So I think this gets back to something that they brought up in the last panel or talks, that it depends on the indication, the market, where the valuation inflection points are, and where we think we can sell the asset or the company. So we're looking at an exit that's somewhere between 3 and 5 years from the initial investment. And so there'll have to be a reason why you'll get to a valuation inflection point or discover something interesting in that time period that would warrant a partner or an acquirer to come by.
Can I just pick up on something you said there about going as early as pre-target, so you're really a biology play at that point. I think some of the teams here will be at around that stage, and I think some of the questions that they're grappling with is, okay, we've got this piece of biology, how can we possibly design a target product profile for a drug that in theory will be on the market in 12 years' time? Do you kind of, I know I don't answer with every case is different, but if something that's that early but it's a really big idea comes to you, do you want them to already have nailed down the target product profile? We've got this area of biology, but we're going to go out and produce something that intervenes early in Alzheimer's? Or is it, if it's cool enough, we're just going to explore the biology and see where we get with it?
Yeah, so if the biology that you're going to explore is for a very specific indication, like Alzheimer's, I think you can develop a target product profile. If your cool biology hasn't lent itself to a particular indication, then that's not really possible. So if you're looking at, the microbiome or the neural immune axis or something where you're looking to identify targets, I think that you're going to have a valuation inflection that's not around a molecule or a target product profile necessarily around a specific disease, but really looking at being able to have a time advantage and a proprietary advantage around something that's not known. And those ideas can be really, really cool, and they're also really, really hard to fund.
Casey.
I work for a fund which does do early stage investing, but it's sort of maybe 10 to 15% of a given fund. So I think one thing that I can say is still true, building on what Tracy said, is that you want to lock down as many degrees of freedom as possible. So what would help for us, for example, we only do a few of these. You want it to come out of a good lab. You want the experiments that you do if you're in animals to be translatable, so that you can create value in increments even though you're very early. And an example of this, where again, you just want to lock down as much as you can. We recently made an investment in a company called Inlibrium out of San Diego that's working on metformin analogs for cancer. And metformin has long been known to have an effect on tumor starving. But what really makes it for us, even though it's incredibly early, is that you have this incredible wealth of data, over years and years and thousands of humans, that at least lets you know you're pointed in the right direction. And then you can go on to replicate various experiments in mice and so on. But I think you just want to be incredibly disciplined about where you're going, especially if you're talking to a fund that largely does things that are later than Series A.
I'll just add to it from the strategic perspective. As I mentioned, within Takeda Ventures, we're looking to invest not for financial return. In fact, Takeda Pharmaceutical Company isn't going to know or care how much money we're making on our investments. It's for us, it's all about investing in companies that we think will mature into a business development deal, whether it's a collaboration or licensing or acquisition, ultimately feeding the pipeline of the pharma company. And so there's a first layer of, if this works, if what we're looking at is successful, will it fit into the pipeline 3, 5, 25 years down the road? And would that be of interest to the company? So, on top of any considerations that a financial investor is going to ask around, do we actually think this is going to be successful? There's a question of, is it going to fit strategically?
Going to just comment on the analogous question from the non-therapeutics. I'd rather see a target product profile around a diagnostic play and no technology than a great technology and no target product profile. That's going to engage me more because it suggests there's a problem you're trying to solve in the world, and perhaps it's attached to money, hopefully, and you can go get or make the technology to address it. The ideal, of course, is a combination of both. But I do think it's possible from the get-go to be describing what it is you're trying to do, and to always be willing to iterate on that. Truth arises more readily from error than confusion.
Could we go just a few, if you could just kind of pick off a wish list of other things. Casey just picked up on a few, kind of come out of good lab, etc. What other things would the full package of an early stage deal, whether it's, they've licensed the IP, the IP from the university is in the company already. What other just kind of wish list things would these guys kind of aim to have before they think they're ready for investment from you guys?
I can take a stab at that. So, I think partly it'll depend, I hate to say that, but it'll vary a little bit in terms of the type of company you're building. I think a biotech company versus a med tech or a diagnostic company, there's more that you can do, frankly, in the bootstrapping mode before you'd even need to come and talk to any of us around a venture investment. But certainly, the easiest thing for us to say is no, right, to anything that we hear. And generally, we're right, unfortunately. So I think the things that work in your favor will be having a way to understand the investor that you're specifically talking to. What are the types of things that they've done before? I think, Casey, you brought up a good example. So if TPG is only doing 10 or 15% of the fund, that's going to be early stage, kind of that first institutional round, trying to understand the companies that TPG has invested in, the profile. You know, again, is it around the specific labs? Is it around a stage of development that they seem most comfortable with? You know, surrounding yourselves with people that are high quality, not only within your team, but also as advisors that might be able to then make the warm introductions to the firms. I think those can go a long way. So just being, I think, really industrious in the way that you approach your interactions with investors. And, you know, I think if you're lucky, you know, investors that are doing early stage deals will have interest in specific areas. And to the extent that what you're working on overlaps with what they're interested in, obviously that makes for a more fulfilling discussion. So I think to the extent that you can use your network and your insights to be able to sort of understand where those investors are coming from, what do they like, what do they not like, I think that'll lead to probably answering some of the questions around what might get someone to say yes rather than no.
Okay, let's. Well, it's an evolution, I think, from something one of the earlier questions. But having spoken to a lot of the audience around their companies, I think they're grappling with the question of focus versus breadth. I think there's, you know, a lot of these companies could have multiple directions they could go. Would you prefer they came with, okay, we've got a technology and we're going to go and solve this problem, or do you get excited about underlying technology and you're going to try and take it in multiple different ways, kind of at the same time? Do you want? Because that's really what they're all grappling with right now.
Yeah, I think in general, investors don't really like a Chinese menu. You know, here I can treat this disease or that disease or this disease. You know, how coming with a plan that you're passionate about, I think, is really helpful. But that goes back to, I think, the points earlier, sort of know your investor. We all have different likes and dislikes. They're not wrong plans or right plans necessarily, and we'll have different things that we're attracted to. And so, you know, ask around to see who likes different therapeutic areas, different therapeutic modalities. If somebody has something in their portfolio, it may mean they're more likely to invest in that because they know the area really well, or they're less likely to invest in that again because I've already got one of those. So you really need to think about why you're going to approach a particular person and what's going to resonate with them, because we're all people. It's not like there's a magic sort of number or a magic plan that's going to work. So if you go to different investors, they'll have different advice and different things that will resonate.
One thing to keep in mind, I think from an investor perspective, it's nice to know that a company has a backdoor or options if things don't work out along the primary trajectory. Often there's not enough money or willpower to pursue those if the lead effort doesn't work out, but that's sort of a nice to have. But as we were talking about, if you're focused on getting to a value inflection point, as an investor, you want to see that the dollars you're investing are going towards creating that value. And so there generally needs to be some discrete achievable, that here's what we're going to do, and if we do this, you're going to make more money than you put in.
I think in general, the rule of thumb would be biased towards more focus. I don't think have you ever seen a pitch where you said, gosh, you're just too focused? Right? I don't think I have. You can, I guess, focus so much that the market isn't big enough, potentially.
You can be focused on the wrong thing.
It can certainly be focused on the wrong thing, and I guess that's why we struggle with focus, because we're afraid of getting it wrong. But mostly the challenge is being too broad and then failing to recruit the people that you need, failing to execute, failing to get the funding that you need because you're not focused enough. So I think that would be my suggestion as rule of thumb. I've heard more experienced investors than myself say, look, it's my job to have a diverse portfolio. I don't want the companies in the portfolio trying to be diverse as well. That's too complicated.
Great.
And we love it when LPs say that. So it's great to say that to the companies, right? Yeah.
I've told several of my companies that. We've heard a lot about pharma this weekend. I'd like to maybe just kind of focus a little bit on some of the other modalities. I think at least half of the room are not going after therapeutics. And, you know, as someone who works predominantly in therapeutics, I'm a bit of a layman when it comes to some of those business models. But an aspect that strikes me as particularly challenging is in a diagnostics company or a digital health company, the transition from where you are today, which is a technology company, where ultimately to get to your value inflection or your exit, you now need to be a commercial company. How do you see your companies making that transition? Is there any advice you can give for people in the audience, whether it's a tools company, diagnostics, devices? My broad understanding in a device is to get an exit, you actually need adoption and traction in the marketplace, not just, does my actual device work or for diagnostics too. So if you agree with that, I think the audience would appreciate some thoughts. Basically.
So the way that I split the world is there's therapeutics and essentially there's non-therapeutics. And the reason for that is with a therapeutic, you have this thing, you don't know if it works. But generally speaking, you know that there's a market for it if it works the way you think it does. With everything else, you have this thing, you generally know it works. What you don't know is if there's a market, and that applies to apps. It applies to oftentimes medical devices and also diagnostics. And in a couple of those areas, I would also add, it can be incredibly hard to get reimbursed. And what you often see is a team that is in love with the technology, but doesn't understand that they won't necessarily get paid for it. It just seems so far away. And I think what's really important if you're doing non-therapeutics is to go and look at other companies that have been successful in the space, see how long it's taken them to actually get paid for what they do, to get reimbursed. And that will give you some understanding of the amount of money you need to put into the company. And we've had experiences with companies where they've sort of said, well, if we don't get paid for our test, then we won't do it. We won't execute the test, and our response has sort of been, vaya con Dios, and let us know how it goes. But there's these incredibly brutal commercial realizations that most people who are looking at the technology have not thought through. So if you're going to consumer, also alleviate some of this, but again, you also don't know if you've got a market or not.
And over in molecular diagnostics, you sit in the lower left-hand corner of Casey's 2x2, which is you don't know whether it works and you don't know whether you have a market. It's the kind of worst of all worlds. Don't know why I do this. No, I do this because sometimes you get a transformative moment where there's novel technology that you take the risk that it might work, and it enables clinical decisions that have an impact on patient care in a way that you couldn't do without that information. So that's kind of the intersection there. But I would say it is true that everything on that you don't know whether you have a market side, then retiring the commercial risk or having some sort of information about the commercial risk. And for tools, that means that doesn't include regulatory, so that's nice, right? But it still includes the question of, is someone going to pay for this product? So I think incorporating into, if you're a non-therapeutics company, incorporating product-focused thinking as soon as possible is very important, and realizing that the difference and the distance between the object, even the instrument, and a product is enormous. And if you've never sold a product before, you won't have intuition for that. So finding someone who does bring that product mindset as soon as possible, even in just an advisory capacity, is going to be very important for that kind of company.
In those types of areas, do you find that the syndicate changes, your investor syndicate changes as you go through from being in the kind of R&D stage to being the commercial? Is there a transition at all, or is it a small enough amount of capital that it's the same group of people?
It does change because there are many investors who simply won't touch these more product-focused companies until there are early revenues, for example. So there's a whole set of investors that are simply not eligible for the crazy early stuff around the R&D investments. So at least in that sense, yes, there's a change.
Okay, let's get back to some kind of general advice. Features of a good founding team. What do you look for when they walk in the door? You know, they've piqued your interest with a PowerPoint, non-confidential PowerPoint. You've read it, kind of sounds interesting. You brought them in. What impresses you? You know, we hear a lot about, oh, we invest in teams. It's a very easy comment to throw away, but what does that actually mean if you're sitting in the audience? Apart from done it 5 times before, because these guys haven't done it 5 times before.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that's one of the challenges for younger founders in the sense of, you know, they haven't been at biotechs before, or tools companies or diagnostics companies. So I think what Simeon said before is really critical of having an advisor that has been in the space before. It doesn't have to be part of the founding team, doesn't have to be joining the company, but some validation, some advice, some help, you know, will help with introductions, help with the plan, give a framework for investors to give sort of a common face and a validation of the technology and the approach. And I think it really helps to round out the conversation to have an advisor.
Yeah, I'll just add, you know, it's been, over the last few years, it's actually been interesting and pretty exciting to see young founders in biotech in particular come into pretty significant roles and attract the right investor attention, pharma attention, and doing some pretty remarkable things. So I think that's a great signal that's happening in the marketplace, that it's not just in tech that you see this. So you guys, I think there are enough examples now of success out there. And I think what I've seen as I've gotten to see how some of these guys who I know quite well have kind of advanced in their careers, what they do is, so having advisors is an important part, and I think that's something that I think you guys hopefully can figure out who are the right people that have this skill set. But then when they also think about building their team, they have enough confidence in what they know and what they don't know to surround themselves with people that are, you know, on paper, much more experienced, much more senior. And even though they might be in this more senior role, they'll have people that around them will supplement, you know, some of the gaps or areas that, again, maybe they haven't necessarily had the experience to date. So I think building a team, even if you're a young founder, that doesn't mean that you can't have people that don't have the gray hair and the experience and have been there, done that before. And then I think the other thing, you know, which is great, I think, about young entrepreneurs is you've obviously got the commitment, the drive, and you have a belief in what you're doing, hopefully. And one of the things that, again, the successful ones I've seen have done really well is they listen well. And it's not just you kind of espousing the virtues of your technology, but it's also taking feedback from investors, from potential partners, from your team around, you know, what are the key questions that keep coming up? What are the things that you're hearing either directly or indirectly in terms of if you address these, you know, I think it'll give you a better shot. And what I've seen with some of these folks is they take that feedback, and the next time you meet them, they've already thought through those questions and have answers, and maybe they've worked on answering some of those things. So, you know, I think being really proactive in the way that you build your company, or surround yourself with the right people, being as good as listening as you are as speaking, I think is something that, you know, I think we all learn these traits when we're 6 or 7, sort of forget them as we get older. But I think it's helpful to keep that in mind.
Hard to boil it down. I would say no hand waving, right? I've seen a lot of companies. I haven't done them, but I've seen a lot. And so I can ask questions, but you should come into the room knowing more about your opportunity, more about your science and technology than I do. So if I'm asking questions and the answers start weaving all over the place because, you know, you're prevaricating, then, you know, that's a clear turn off. So, you know, do your homework, be prepared before you go in the room.
I'll just do a corollary to that. If you don't know the answer, then find the answer for the next pitch. Just say, I don't know. It's an interesting question, but the hand waving is definitely hard to.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I mean, one of the things that, I mean, if you just think about how this relationship is going to develop, it's going to be a kind of long one. And you know, your investors are sitting on your board, but that means they're only kind of interfacing with you potentially only every kind of 8 weeks or so. They need to trust you to be, you know, getting on with the day-to-day and to tell you when things aren't going well, and that everything that you're telling them is completely transparent and you know, you're not afraid to deliver bad news. So any hint in those initial meetings that there's it's not quite as robust, and you're not being as upfront as you might be, that's a kind of total red flag. Okay, so what about when should they reach out to you, and how should they reach out to you? Is it ever too early? Should they wait until they've got ready to go into the clinic? I mean, I know different investors have different preferences, but should they come to you when they want money, 2 years before that, when they're still at university, when they've incorporated a company, or you're only really interested if it's ready to go and they want the money in the next 3 months?
I don't know, one of the things that I've enjoyed about OneStart actually is it's great just to have a conversation about what you're doing. I'm interested. That's fun. Happy to ask questions and give feedback. But also it's being done in an environment where I know you're just asking for advice and just running something by me. That kind of meeting can be great. And so it's never too early to sit down with VCs or pharma companies or whoever and get feedback on what you're doing, get some input. But when it comes time to actually making a pitch to raise money, then you have to be aware of who the audience is, what investor are you going in front of. If it's TPG, if they've already made a few early stage investments in your early stage company, you may be wasting your time. So, and likewise, if you're coming to Takeda Ventures, but you've got an anti-infectives company, I don't do that, right? So, know who your audience is, and then be ready to make that pitch and have done your homework.
It's never too early for me, but that's partly because I'm a very early stage investor, and I'll sometimes invest right out of university. It's partly because what you're doing is more interesting than what I'm doing, and is why I do what I do. Because you are doing amazing things with vibrant teams and incredible science, and it's my honor to hear about it, and especially in that context that you're describing of this is a conversation, hopefully something that happens in our conversation will be useful to you, because it's going to be fun for me, and we know that the probability of me writing you a check is very small, even in the best of circumstances, right? So to my mind, the goal of the conversation is to move both of us more toward our individual and collective goals in this space. And so for that reason, I think as long as you're looking for some incremental progress in each of those conversations, whether it's you to learn something that you should put in your pitch for the next time, me to learn something about this incredible field that you're in, then I think that can be a productive conversation. It just comes down to triage, right? If we had infinite time, we could have all of those conversations. But thinking about how to best use your time so that you're getting what you need out of the conversation, I think is even more important than how I think about that question.
I mean, from a personal note, the kind of come early and ask for advice is something I would really recommend. And just because if you just think about the kind of, these are two human beings interacting, it's, if you're coming for the first time asking for money, I know I'm going to have to say no. No one likes saying no, but, I know I'm going to end up doing it. If you come asking for advice, then it's just a really fun interaction, just like it is over this weekend, and I'm much more likely to say, yeah, come in and have a chat, I'll give you my thoughts. Now that I've already done that, when you come and ask me for money in 6 months' time, we've already got that dialogue, and I'm trapped. I'm going to have to give you an answer, as opposed to ignore you, because we've built a personal relationship. So, always ask for advice. Come early and ask for advice before you want money. Well, that's if you want money from me.
Just to you asked the second part of the question of how should you get connected with people sitting around the table with the checkbooks. A friendly introduction sort of always the best way for the corporate venture funds. If there's like a scientist that that can make an introduction, who works for the company, that can be very helpful. Apparently, Roche Venture Fund has invested in its 15-year history in one company that actually came into venturefund@roche.com. But that's it, and that's the only time I think I've ever heard of that. So you really do need to.
and the mailbox was closed immediately thereafter. Right?
It's like that's a real email address? It is, but most of the time.
It doesn't ping back with an out of office. All right, so we're going to open up to Q&A in just a second, but I'd just be interested from the panel to see if there are any just common pitfalls that you see, you know, in first-time pitches, things for the audience to not do, things that just kind of turn you off immediately. We talked about kind of, you know, kind of not knowing what you're supposed to know and not being upfront about it, but anything else?
I think one thing where there's a fine balance is sort of, you know, as Matt said, it's nice to be asked for advice, and people like that, and you'll probably be able to get people's time if you are essentially friendly. There's also being too aggressive and sort of pounding the table for an ask because you've been told you need to make an ask. I think it should be clear in your pitch what's going to build value and how much it takes to get there. And an investor that is interested will also be asking you, you know, how much money are you looking for and when do you want to buy? They're not confused about that. So it can be a real turnoff if people are pushing very hard and you're essentially happy to give advice, but that's it. And again, you get forced into this no situation, which is less of the relationship you want to have. So I think to some degree a bit of a soft sell is more successful. That's the one point I'll make.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that, you know, obviously first impressions go a long way in any interaction that you have. And so I think if you have a chance to sit down and you're formally doing your pitch, really within the first few minutes, you're leaving an impression, you know, whether it's around how, you know, how aggressive you're being in terms of the way you're coming over, just the interaction, you know, making good eye contact, having a pretty clear, crisp kind of vision statement around what you're trying to do with your company, what the big idea is here, and sort of getting us hooked immediately is something that is in your control. I think if you fail to do that in the first few minutes, you know, with obviously we've got our cell phones, we've got our computers, it's pretty easy to get lost in something else. So I think really being, you know, making sure that you're, again, proactive, making good impression. If you're asked questions, answering those questions, answering them honestly, I think these are all things that again, you can hopefully control.
And there are resources as well, right? I mean, the internet and television is a great source of information. There are company presentations that are available, you know, publicly. Go download them. You can see how they construct their slide decks. You watch commercials or, you know, watch Shark Tank and get a feel for, you know, what makes you cringe, right? If you see somebody making a pitch and you think, I would never buy that, don't do that, right?
Yeah, I think that one thing that's always frustrating is when you're 20 minutes into a conversation and you still don't know why you're here. Like, what are you asking me for? What's the technology? I don't know. And so there's a lot of time where people do the background for so long that I just don't even know what they're trying to do. So being really, really crisp about where you're going and why you think that's exciting up front, and then sort of backfill with the information can be really helpful.
And mine's very specific, which is point of care diagnostics. When you don't know what point of what care.
And who cares?
See a lot of people kind of stumble into point of care diagnostics as an intuitively appealing application for whatever sensor thing they did in their postdoc, without really having done the work of understanding how will this be used in the clinic, what is it currently replacing, how much will someone actually pay for it, what will someone prescribe based on the result. So it seems awfully specific, and yet, as I was telling Jens, I've averaged one point of care diagnostics pitch a week for the last 6 years, and most of them look like that, so I'm actually pretty irritable about it, so it's worth mentioning.
I'll layer on the therapeutic equivalent, which is I've got a very elegant way to create new antibody fragments or to drug GPCRs or something to that effect. Now, and then they ask me which targets they should be going after. So, you know, I don't know. It's your idea. You have to tell me what you're going to do with your technology. And this goes back to being a technology that's found an unmet need, not looking for one. So that would be my equivalent of that. So we've got 10 minutes left. I think this is a good panel to have a bit more Q&A than less. So let's hand it over to the audience. Lady in the middle.
Hi, my name is Adriana. I'm a consultant with McKinsey & Company. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Hi, my name is Adriana. I'm a consultant with McKinsey & Company, though I have a scientific background and a personal interest in venture. One thing that came through very clearly from the panel is that investors and venture capitalists are not a single stakeholder, but have very different investment strategies. And one thing I'm interested in also is how firms vary after the investment's made in terms of your operating model. So one thing that you can think of is a spectrum between a traditional venture model where you're one of many investors making an investment, you may or may not have a board seat, all the way to a more collaborative model, which maybe is being illustrated by Third Rock and Atlas and Flagship, where they're almost co-building and co-founding companies with their entrepreneurs. And so I'm interested to hear from you guys how a young entrepreneur might think about engaging with a firm based on their different operating models.
Wow, I think this is such a great question. The most important answer to your question is ask that question when you're talking to investors, and don't forget that you're interviewing us as well. So there will be such a broad range of models, and make sure the model that the investor you're talking to fits what you want to do with your company. So I'll start there and then hand over to the panel for your specific question.
Yeah, I mean, so with SR1, historically we've done the former, which is we make investments in companies that are, relatively well established, where we usually take a board seat and we'll manage as closely as is needed, but it's generally pretty hands off in terms of letting the team, obviously do what we've given them the money to do. Over the last couple of years, we have started doing a lot more early stage kind of seed company formation, and similar to what you've described. Third Rock and others do, and that requires us to be much more hands-on, and oftentimes there aren't teams there, and we're taking on roles and responsibilities that would look like what you guys are doing in terms of building the companies. I personally, I think we like to work with other investors when we're doing that, even at that early stage. I think it's nice to be able to share some of the burden, the financial risk, and it's nice to have different ideas around the table. So again, I think it'll depend on the firm that you're talking to, but I think there's enough firms out there that are doing both, where hopefully, depending on what you want to do or the stage of your company, you should be able to hopefully find the right match there.
Yeah, the investing that I've done, similarly, you make the investment and you stay with that investment for the life, and it's not so much of a collaborative. But I think that one thing that I do think about actually quite a lot when I'm looking at a new investment is not just what the expertise is of the founding team, but the expertise of the board members. We always syndicate. We prefer at least 2 other syndication partners. A two-way syndicate is not the ideal for us. We want 3 or 4. And it's great when you have sitting around the table, one person who's a PhD, one person who's an MD, one person who's been, at a commercial company, and then one person who's either, a lawyer or an accountant. So if you have your 4 investors sort of having different viewpoints, especially at an early stage company where they need to be thinking, getting a lot of input and ideas, and there's a lot more hands-on time, you can get different things from your different venture investors, and I think that's quite helpful to a young company.
I think another thing to add to that, and you could speak for days on that question, but another thing to add is to be in communication with your investors over time and understand how their focus may be changing over time. From a strategic perspective, pharma strategies change. So if I've invested in an oncology company and now all of a sudden we don't do oncology anymore, that may affect how I interact with that company. Or if I'm at a financial firm and just had a huge blow up where now there's a big hole in the portfolio, or we're out raising money and need an exit, or things like that. There's lots of different things that will affect how an investor behaves over time.
What I'd say is that in terms of the firms that do more company building, I would feel free to go to them a lot earlier and bat ideas around. And in my mind, that would actually be one of the major differences. Companies that are doing more traditional venture investing, where they expect more of the pieces to be in place, may be less willing to meet up every couple months, and just chat. I had one other thought, and now it's gone. But I think actually, I wanted to speak about something that was brought up earlier, which is that it's also you interviewing them. There's got to be a good fit. This is a long relationship, and you could be in a close working relationship with this set of people for a decade even. So it's also important for you to like them as well.
Hi, I'm Diego Alvarez, and my question for you is, what is your point of view regarding investment in companies from Latin America and what complications you might have?
So I work for TPG and we have offices around the world. We take FCPA issues very seriously, and it's something which comes up more when you're dealing outside of the U.S. jurisdiction. So I think if you're talking about pure science, that's less of an issue. But if you're going to be investing millions of dollars in something, you want to know that it's going the right way. And oftentimes what we'll do, even for a company, say in Australia or something like that, is you'll move it to where you want to actually develop the drug or the diagnostic or whatever it is you're trying to do, so that you know everything is happening exactly as it should, because it's just too much money to take risks that you may not understand if you don't actually have offices based there.
Yeah, I guess a corollary to that, and Takeda, we invest globally, but there's 4 of us, right? So that's either a lot of travel, or we'll have to rely on investors who are local to the company that we will work with and make sure that we have that comfort that there's somebody on the ground, within a 5-minute drive, who knows what they're doing and can be helpful in case there's an issue.
Because I do really early work, I generally want to be within 15, 20, 30 miles of the companies that I'm working with. So it would take a lot for me to invest in a company that's not here. And if I did, it would be probably only following someone else, so that's not terribly useful to you. So looking for that lead who is comfortable with your geography, wherever that is probably the most important thing. And then perhaps they can influence others to follow along.
Yeah, I'd echo that. We have an Israel investment, and OrbiMed have an Israel-specific fund, and they're invested in this company. It's a great company, but I would have never done it if I didn't have Erez, who's 300 yards away from the company. So I don't know what the equivalent local fund is, but you need to really get them on board and then use them to co-market into other more established jurisdictions. Okay.
And it goes to the United States as well. I mean, quite honestly, right? If you're in Kansas, it's just not the same.
Questions? Yeah.
Would you consider it a red flag if the inventors of the technology are not part of the management, but just a scientific advisory board?
No, I'd want to understand why, but that could actually give me some comfort, because more often I've seen the inverse problem, which is the inventors think they need to be the CEO or some role that is not the same as what they are awesome at, which is being innovative. So I don't think that they have to be on the team. Very often, because again, I do early work, the inventor is actually a PI or a postdoc who's on a PI track, and that is their career ambition, which is awesome. And so they want to see their inventions have an impact and get commercialized, but they don't want to leave that track and go be an entrepreneur. So I think there are some very reasonable explanations for why an inventor wouldn't be even in the company or in management. It's just important to be clear about what those are.
I think depending especially on the personality of everyone involved, you sort of have the company moves along a spectrum from scientific to development to commercial. And the people who are the best for the company at the beginning may not be the best for the company at the end. It can get rowdy. You want to mitigate, as as much dissension as you can while you're moving along that spectrum. So honestly, it can even be better, but it depends on the personalities of the founders.
Just one last point. I mean, there's also ways if the founder is still working in the lab and continuing to advance the particular area that you're going to be developing your company around, to either have sponsored research in that person's lab, or to have that person involved as an advisor, SAB member. And so, I think, again, you need to look at what the makeup of your team is, make sure that you have the right skill set within the company, but you could have a founder that's not in the company that is still contributing and having an impact.
Hi. What keeps you up at night?
Caffeine.
When CEOs and management teams aren't worried, everything's great. That means I'm the person who has to worry. When they're doing all the worrying, it's much better for me.
I mean, I think for me, it's capital raising for my companies, making sure that they have enough money to be able to run the experiments, hire the right people. And, I think we've been fortunate the last few years. It's been a good time to be raising money in biotech in particular. So the companies that I'm involved in are relatively speaking well-funded. But that's a big issue. And then the second one is people, right? Making sure that we have the right people in there, and if there's any discord or any issues that I'm aware of. And that's where I think being close to the companies physically, being able to spend time with them outside of just board meetings, you get a sense for what's happening. And if there's issues there, which they inevitably are, making sure that we're trying to figure out how to solve for them sooner rather than later.
I think the most 3 a.m. angst and anger I've ever had about anything, actually, is about when a portfolio CEO seems to be closing herself or himself off from dialogue to help solve the problem. They're shutting down. They're not sharing information anymore. They're not responding to inquiry. That kind of isolationism. It's very frustrating when as an investor I feel like we're all in the same boat. We only win or lose together. Let's play together. Let's be a team. And when I see the management begin to not act like a team, either internally or with the investors and board, that's when I'm up at 3 a.m. wondering how do we even move forward in that setting.
I do have a point of care solution for that.
You do, but you're not going to like it.
Gentleman at the back in the suit and tie.
With the markets falling recently, how do you view the capital raising markets going forward? And when things get tough in the next couple of years, how would you advise entrepreneurs to raise capital?
I think that again, this is where it comes down to having a really clean, well-articulated path to increasing value. That this $300,000 is going to go to this mouse experiment, which is going to prove X, and that will, translate, and then we can move from there. My guess is that in this funding environment, companies that are maybe more focused, maybe less platform-oriented, will have a little bit more success because people will know what they're buying. So I would just be as clean as possible when it comes to that.
Tranching. You get familiar with that word. So the idea there is not all of the money that an investor will invest will go in on day one, but there will be milestones along the way that trigger additional portions of that capital coming in. So it may be committed on day one, but only if you continue to progress along that path. And I think that's ultimately the best way to bridge valuation pressure on the one hand with a need for capital over the long term on the other.
Yeah, it was a really interesting JP Morgan in January this year where the public markets investors were the sky is falling, and private market investors were just going along as usual. And, it's not something that was really impactful. So I sort of have a double dose of that. I only do private market investing, and I don't need to fundraise because I work for a corporate venture fund. We see when the markets go down or when they're, as flat as a flapjack, that it doesn't matter to us. We really can, it's actually a buying opportunity for us. We're going to see more deal flow. We're going to see better deal flow because other investors might be getting a little bit worried. So for that type of environment, it's actually can be quite good for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one other kind of related point is in your business plan, don't make an IPO your preferred route of business development in the future, because the IPO windows opens and then it closes. Sorry. Whereas if you believe in producing good data that's benefiting patients, or you're generating commercial traction, an industry exit, will be there. So, IPOs are great. You can be opportunistic about them, but you can't count on them. Question.
Thank you. Many of us here are university-based startups, and the IP is owned by the university. I'm curious to know if you have a preference of us having negotiations done with the university about equity in the company that they want for licensing the IPs, or are you okay for us to approach you, and if you show the interest and then we accelerate those negotiations with the university? Along with that, do you have any preference on how much of the % can the university own in the startup? Thank you.
Yeah, preference is 0. That's what happens. Yeah. So yeah, as little as possible, obviously, and that's good for the company and good for the investors. So again, because I am crazy and go super early, I'm happy to have that conversation with you before you have the license. I get a little nervous if you've never spoken to the university about it before, and so you're just testing ideas. But for example, I've invested in a company that had the exclusive option to negotiate the license, but didn't have it yet. I went and talked to the OTL and just assured myself that they were excited about entering into the license, but that wasn't a real risk. So I feel like it's a risk that I know how to assess. Certainly easier if you're already past that. You've got the license and the terms are reasonable, and that's not something we have to talk about.
The option structure can be really useful also because when you do have venture involved, sometimes the OTLs will start to get valuation expectations that rise. And so it's nice to have some agreement in place before you bring in the money.
Are there any structural issues that you find with companies that approach you, like we're an LLC or some of our investors have non-dilution clauses or things like that, that for you are just no-go, red flag sorts of things, or can you generally work those out?
If you're not a Delaware C Corp, I wonder whether you're playing this game, is my starting position. So there better be a good explanation. I've never seen one.
But conversion, I just did a deal where we converted, right? We were interested in the LLC, we converted it to a C Corp. That can be messy, but you can do it. It's just legal stuff. There are definitely some, poison pills in the terms that previous investors have. For example, if you have angel money that has come in at a really high valuation and you know that there's just going to be way too much brain damage in negotiating a price that makes sense for a venture investor, life is short, it's hard to take those on. But, so those sorts of things can be really detrimental to getting additional investment on board.